Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I've put together a collection of 10 Christmas ornament DIYs for Christmas in July. To begin, I need to prime my plastic ornaments, and I'm just using Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in the color white, and I'm just dabbing that on with a little sponge. I'm going to be doing 2 coats of this, and then my surface will be ready for paint. You can find a full product list in the description below, and most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Once my primer is completely dry and I've given it 12 hours to set, I'm going to take my dust air dry clay and I'm going to start working it into this silicone mold. I will link it below. I'm just pressing that clay in. I've already dusted the mold with cornstarch, and then I'm going to flex the mold and carefully pull it out. I'm going to be making quite a few of these, and you definitely just want to take your time, and again, that cornstarch is definitely a lifesaver, especially when you are casting a lot like I am. Once I'm finished casting all of my molds, I'm going to take my quickset wood glue and apply it to the back, and I'm going to start adding them to my ornament. So I have the design facing the center of the bottom section, and I'm going to be layering those molds all over this ornament. So you can see I'm just sort of positioning them there. At the end of each of these castings, there's this little section that sort of flips up a little bit. I actually really love that detail, so I'm making sure that I don't flatten that or squish it down. So I'm going to continue adding those. As you can see, the points are meeting in the center, and then I'm going to continue to glue those castings on. So when it comes to the next one, you can see I'm sort of layering it over the top of the previous one, and then there'll also be a mold in the gap between them. This isn't going to be even, this isn't going to be perfect or symmetrical, but once all of those molds are glued on, it will definitely look beautiful and effective. It reminds me of an old architectural salvage piece that maybe would have been on a staircase, on a banister perhaps, and these molds are just completely transforming this ornament. So I'm going to continue gluing these down until I get up to the top. Once we get up to the top, I'm going to lay that mold down just like I would further down, but once I have them all glued and up against the opening section where the little attachment goes on the top, I am going to have to trim off the excess so that hanging attachment can go back on. So I'm just using a palette knife to carefully cut away the excess clay so that that attachment will be able to go over the top again. I'll then be allowing my castings to dry for 24 hours. Next, I'm using Dixie Belle's Latte limited edition fall color. I have a little chip brush that I'm using. I'm also using a mister over the top of my paint to help it spread down into all of those details. These are some very detailed castings. We've got them packed in pretty tight, so I definitely like to use that water to help that paint move. So I'm going to continue adding this paint until I have the whole ornament covered, and I'm just going to do 1 coat here. This paint is very highly pigmented. Once I have the whole ornament painted and it's dry, I'm going to grab my Paint Couture Extreme Guard Satin Top Coat, and I'm going to seal the entire piece. This will protect my piece, but it will also be a great base for our next step. Once the clear coat is completely dry, I'm going to use Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to work it into all of the details on those castings. And then once I've done that, I'm also adding a little bit of water again to help it move and also to water down some of the intensity of that glaze. And then once I'm happy with the coverage, I'm going to be taking a wet wipe and I'm going to be wiping back some of the excess. I'm going to continue adding that glaze and wiping back the excess until the whole thing is covered. I'm using a glaze for this step. If you don't have access to this, you could perhaps create your own paint wash with a brown water-based paint and water it down, or maybe a wax. Once that glaze is dry, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Vintage Lace Luxe Metallic Paint, and I'm going to be running it over the top of the details. Now, I don't want full coverage here. I want to be able to see that lovely glaze on top of the latte. So I'm just making sure that I'm not overdoing it in the sections where there aren't any castings. I'm just sort of dabbing on that product. We don't need full coverage. I'm just going to work my way around the ornament until I have all of those sections hit with some of that lace metallic paint. So this is really beautiful, really pigmented, and as it dries, this paint actually becomes more shiny, more vibrant. So it's definitely a lovely product to use. If I've inspired you to use any of the Paint Couture products that I'm using today, I would love it if you would use my affiliate link in the description. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture, and right now until the end of November, you will get free shipping on orders of $75 or more when you use my code Farmhouse75. Once the lace metallic paint is dry, I'm going to use the bronze luxe metallic, and I am going to go over the top of just a few sections on each of the molds just to add even a little bit more shine and a little bit of a tonal difference there. It'll just catch the light nicely, and these two paints work really beautifully together. Once that bronze is dry, I am going to take that same vintage lace again, and I'm going to be adding it to the little hanging attachment. So I'm just adding the attachment back to the ornament first, and then I'm going to add some of that vintage lace over the top of that attachment. Right now it's sort of just this sort of cheap silver looking plastic because it is plastic, but adding this vintage lace paint really gives it a much more high-end look. Once that's dry, I'm going to attach this champagne gold ribbon to the top for my hanging. I'm just going to cut the length that I need, and then I'm going to tie a knot in the top. And here's a look at our first finished ornament. I'm so happy with how this turned out. Those molds are beautiful, and that metallic paint sets them off beautifully. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my next ornament, I'm going to be casting the other design from that same mold that we were using before. I'm just working my clay into that mold. I've already got the cornstarch there to help me be able to get it out. And I'm going to then flex the mold and carefully pull the clay out. And I am going to be casting several of these, but in this case, I'm only going to be making enough to position them around the top of the ornament. Once I have enough castings, I'm going to take my same quickset wood glue. I'm applying it all over the back, and then I'm going to apply it to the ornament itself. I want to leave a little bit of a gap between the top section of the ornament and where my molds sit. I started positioning them out with a bit more of a gap between them, but I then started adding them so that the little section that flares out at the bottom, so that they sort of touch or almost touch against each other as they go around the top. I also thought about adding some more of these molds down the bottom. I did cast several more of them, but in the end I felt like just adding them to the top section was enough, and I will use those castings in a later project on this video. So I'm going to keep gluing those castings on until I have them all in position. I left them overnight to dry, and now I'm using Dixie Belle's Buttercream Chalk Mineral Paint to paint over the entire ornament. I'm still being gentle here even though my castings are completely dry, and it's going to take 2 coats to get the coverage that I want. I'm also adding the paint in a stippling motion so that we don't get brush strokes, and it will look just a bit more like texture if I do that dabbing motion. Once my paint is completely dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1 and I'm going to start applying that over the ornament where there are no castings. Now I'm applying it in a bit more of a cross-hatch motion, a little bit random here rather than just brushing it on. I find that that gives me a bit more natural looking crackles in a way, instead of it looking a bit like that alligator look. So I'm just adding that, and then in the blank section up the top, I'm just dabbing the product on. Once my crackle is dry, it will feel a bit sticky and tacky, and I'm then able to come in with step 2, and I'm repeating the same process, applying it in a cross-hatching sort of random motion, and then I'm going to let this dry completely, which took about an hour. Once my crackle was completely dry, I took Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to start applying it over the top of the crackle that that product has created. And as you can see, it's definitely a more natural look here. So I'm just working that product into the cracks that have formed. And then I'm going to be taking a wet wipe and I'm going to start wiping back the excess so that the product sits mainly in those cracks. I still want to tone that paint because I do want this to have a very vintage antiqued feel, but I don't want there to be too much there. I want to have that nice balance. So I'm going to continue removing that glaze, and then I'm going to move on to the top. So I'm just going to start applying it over the top of the castings, and then I'm also working it into the gaps, and again repeating that process, taking that wet wipe and wiping it away. And I'm really loving how that glaze is highlighting all the beautiful details in those castings. Once I've applied the glaze to the entire ornament and it's completely dry, I'm going to use some of Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic. I started off applying it to the castings with a brush, but it felt a little bit too heavy. I wanted it to be a little bit more subtle, so I did end up putting down the brush, and I did actually switch to just using my finger. So I'm just going to dip my finger into the product and use that to apply the product to the casting so that it looks a little bit more like faded or worn off gilding. Once that's completely dry, I'm going to take the hanging attachment and I'm going to put it back on top of the ornament. And then I'm going to be taking that same bronze that we just used and I'm going to be painting the attachment so that it ties in with the design. Once that's dry, I'm going to take some of that same ribbon that we used for the first ornament. I'm going to loop it through, cut the length that I need, and then tie a knot. And here's a look at our second ornament. I'm so happy with how this turned out. That glaze brought out the details in those castings beautifully, and that crackle has given this a wonderfully aged feel. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For our third ornament, I'm going to be taking this mold here that I have. It's actually a frame mold, but I'm going to work some of my Das air dry clay into it. It's very detailed and it's definitely better used with resin, but I wanted to see if I could get a casting here so that it would look like old French trim, and it's very fragile, but I just thought I would just give it a try and see how it goes. So I've worked the clay in. I'm now using my palette knife to scrape off the excess, and then once I have the excess off, I'm going to be flexing the mold and then turning it over. I'm then carefully pulling that clay out of the mold. We're going to have some breakage here, but I don't mind. I can always glue those pieces back together, and I'm just going to continue pulling that clay out until we have the entire design free. I'm then going to be applying some wood glue to my ornament. As you can see, I've applied it in sort of an arc, sort of a shape. I want this casting to look like it's draped over the ornament itself in a curved sort of a pattern. So I'm going to start applying my castings there. Anytime that any of it breaks off, I'm able to just glue it back on very easily. We want this to look vintage anyway, so it doesn't matter if there's some breaking and some cracking. And then I'm going to mirror that same curve on the other side of the ornament. Once I have those pieces glued down, I'm going to cast the larger bow from this little mold, and I'm actually going to be casting 2 of these. So I'm just working the clay into the design, and then once I've pulled back most of the excess, I'm going to flex the mold and then turn it over and carefully pull the design out. I'm then going to apply glue to the back of my casting, making sure that I have the entire piece covered, and I'm going to layer that bow over the top of our casting there, and then I'm going to mirror that same design on the other side with another one of those bows. My vision for this was definitely one of those sort of French provincial swag designs that you might see in an old chateau. The next day I came in and added some of Dixie Belle's buttercream chalk mineral paint over the top of my castings, and even though they've been drying for about 24 hours, I'm still being very gentle not to overwork that paint and damage the castings. I'm also dabbing and stippling that paint on just like we did with the last one. As you can see in this video, I'm definitely keeping my colours in a more neutral palette. These are French country inspired. However, if you wanted to go a bit more festive, at this point you could come in with a lovely red paint or perhaps a green. Once my paint had completely dried, I sealed the entire ornament with Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in satin. This is going to protect the paint and also be a great base for our next step. Once the top coat is dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's light brown sugar glaze and I'm going to apply it to the entire ornament. I'm really working it into all of the details of those castings. This is a lighter brown glaze. It's definitely going to give us a wonderfully antiqued look here. So I'm just applying it, again working it into the details, and then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to be taking a wet wipe and I am going to be dabbing off that excess. I want to make sure, however, that it does stay in those crevices, in those details, so that this has a really vintage antiqued look. And I'm going to repeat the same process all over the ornament until I am happy with the look. I just wanted to take this moment in the video to let you guys know, in case you haven't heard, I have started a free Facebook group called the Provincial Farmhouse Creatives Group. It's a place where you can go and you can share the things that you've made and interact with other people who enjoy watching my videos or just enjoy crafting. I hope that you will come and join us. I'll make sure that I have a link in the comments for you to follow if you're interested in joining. I hope to see you there. Once that glaze is dry, I'm going to use Paint Couture's Antique Gold Luxe Metallic Paint, and I am going to be applying it to our castings. I don't mind too much if I don't have full coverage on this. I would like for it to look a little bit like worn gilding. So I'm just going to be using that small artist brush and going over the top of those castings until I have covered them all. If you do not have access to this metallic paint, you could use some sort of a gilding wax instead. It really is up to you. You could leave this step out if maybe this was a little bit too much for you, or you could go in a different direction and you could add red to that bow and give it a really festive feel. Once that paint is completely dry, I'm also going to be adding it to the hanging attachment on the top. Once that's dry, I'm going to take that same paint and I just have it on a fan brush and I'm just going to flick it over the top of the ornament just so we can get some lovely little gold speckles. I did actually add a little bit of water to that gold paint to make this step a little bit easier. Next, I am going to cut off another length of that ribbon and tie a knot. And here's our finished third ornament. I think this turned out really sweet. I'm loving how that glaze looks with that beautiful antique gold paint. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my project, I'm using this set of 4 frames that I got. They were all connected together and then attached to that little rod there that you see. I'm actually going to pull off the entire backing system there. It's just been hot glued on, and the glass has also been hot glued on, so I'm going to make sure that I don't disturb that too much. I just need the glass in there, not the backing, because we want to be able to see through that glass and create sort of a frosted winter effect. So I'm going to pull that felt off, make sure I've got as much of that felt off as possible, and then we can get started. I'm then going to be using my amazing casting resin. I have a variety of molds here that I'm going to fill so that I can work out exactly what I want to create my little Christmas winter scenes. And I'm just pouring out equal parts A and B into a silicone cup, and then I'm stirring it for 30 seconds or until it becomes clear. I'm then going to start pouring out my resin into my different molds. I know I definitely want these 2 little reindeers. I definitely want the little Christmas trees. I'm actually going to be casting a couple of those, and I definitely want to be having this little Santa here, and also I'm going to cast a couple of these little snowflakes. I always like to have a few molds on hand in case I have some excess resin left over. Anywhere that my resin hasn't quite reached in my mold, I'm just using the end of my stirring stick to sort of pull that resin through to make sure that we have some there so that it will be able to be cast. It's going to take about 10 minutes for my castings to be ready, and when they are ready, I'm going to start taking them out and start having a little bit of a play with the arrangement, working out how I want each of my scenes to look. As I was working out my design, I also decided to pour some resin into this swag design, some more trees, and into a couple of these little birds, and also a few more of the snowflakes. Again, with shallow designs, I like to use the paddle pop stick that comes with your resin kit to sort of spread that out. It makes pulling them out a little bit easier. You get less excess around the edges, and you can spread it a bit further. I'm then going to start pulling out those castings, and you can see here I'm just having a bit of a play also with the orientation of the frames, working out if maybe I want to have a couple of them on the horizontal view as opposed to the portrait. But this is definitely going to evolve as I am playing with this. Like with any project, it's just going to take some time until you work out exactly how you want something to appear. Next, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Peace Mineral Paint. This has a built-in top coat in it as well, and I'm going to go and paint over each of the frames. I did switch to a smaller brush to try and get into those details a little bit easier. Now, I didn't mind how the frames were looking originally, and in the end, we do actually get a little bit of a similar look, but the problem was that each of these had these weird red speckles on them. I'm not sure why that was done. I think it was a factory effect. Maybe they were trying to simulate rust. I don't know, but it was just not what I was looking for. And also, I'm going to be painting the castings the same color. So that would have been very hard for me to try and match that to this original frame design. So we're going to go over the top of each of these frames with 2 coats of this mineral paint. And then we're also going to be using the same paint on our castings. So it just made life a lot easier painting everything the same color at the same time. I did end up only really doing 1 coat on each of our castings. The pigments in this paint were wonderful, and it really had great coverage. Just a reminder that you can find a full product list in the description of this video, and most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Once my paint was completely dry, I took Paint Couture's Aged Cafe Pigment, and I'm going to be mixing that with Paint Couture's Pigment Medium. So I'm going to take a little bit out. I'm just using the end of a spoon here. I'm just going to put a few little drops of that in there, and then I'm going to add a bit more of this pigment. Now, you are supposed to really do equal parts, but I just had a bit of a play here. I've never used this before, so I was just doing it until it looked the way that I wanted. And then once I was happy with it, I went in and really worked it into the details of this little tree mold first. So I'm definitely using it similar to a glaze, and then using a wet wipe to wipe back some of the excess from those high points. And I'm also going to go into the frame and repeat the same process. If you don't have access to these particular products, you could use a dark wax instead, a antiquing glaze, perhaps a paint wash. It really will be up to you on what look you're trying to go for. I'm definitely going for a bit more of a vintage, aged, dark winter feel for these. You could go in the opposite direction and you could use a white wax or a white paint wash if you wanted to go a little bit lighter. I'm really loving how adding this beautiful pigment is actually making these particular castings look almost like pewter. They definitely look like metal. This is a really fun look. I'm going to later on be toning these down a little bit to sort of tie in a little bit more with the Christmas winter theme, but I am loving the way this really highlights all of those beautiful details. Next, I'm going to set these to one side, and I'm going to use Paint Couture's Crystal Paste in Silver and Pearl. This is going to give us a beautiful frosted look on this glass, which is why I wanted to leave the glass in, because we want to be able to obviously see the light through this beautiful sparkly paste. So I'm actually going to be swapping between the pearl and the silver paste. I really love the combination of both of those. I'm just applying the product in a dabbing and stippling motion, and what I like about using a paintbrush is that I'm getting edges that look very similar to frost. And again, just having a play with how I'm applying this, how heavy I'm going in. I'm obviously a little bit thinner in other areas. You can see I've positioned the Santa on the frame where he's going to sit so that I can get an idea of how this is going to look when it's a bit more put together. And I'm just going to continue to apply this beautiful crystal paste until I am happy with the look. Once that paste is dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Crust Medium. I've already tinted this with some of their angelic mineral paint. I did that in a previous video. Now I'm just applying some down the bottom there because obviously I want this to look a little bit like snow. So I'm just applying a little bit of that product down the bottom with a palette knife. I'm popping it on that glass there, and then I'm sort of dabbing at the product to create raised peaks. If I inspire you to try any of these beautiful Paint Couture products, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. You'll find it in the description and I'll pop it on the screen. Right now they're having a 20% off sale throughout December. And if you use my code Farmhouse20 and also my discount link, you will get 20% off. And what a great Christmas present. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Once I'm happy with how that looks, I'm going to take my hot glue gun and I'm going to apply some glue on the sections of our Santa that are going to touch the frame, and then I'm going to glue him in place. I'm also then going to glue a couple of snowflakes on the glass next to him. Next, I'm going to work on my next design. I am adding some glue to the back of our little reindeer that's laying down. I'm positioning that on the glass, and then I'm going to layer our greenery swag in front of him. And once I've done that and I'm happy with that, I'm going to come in with some more of the crystal paste, again, just to give that beautiful frosted effect. Next is our tree design. I'm just working out the positioning here. I do want the larger tree in the center and then the other two to be on the outside of the frame. So I'm going to glue down our tree in the center on the glass first. And then once I have that in position, I'm going to be using some of our crust medium around the base again to give that look of snow. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to glue our other 2 trees in place. I'm then going to grab some more of that beautiful crystal paste and add that to the glass. For our next design, I'm positioning the little reindeer on the left, the taller tree on the right, and then a smaller one in the center. So I'm just working out placement here, and then I'm going to come in and put the snow where it will be visible underneath the larger tree. So I'm just scraping some of that out and positioning that down in the bottom right-hand corner. Once I'm happy with how that looks, I'm going to start gluing our pieces down. The larger tree did have the top section fall off, so I'm just going to glue the larger section down first, and then I'm going to put a dab of glue above that tree where the section that came off has to go, and then I'm going to carefully press that in place. So don't ever panic if your molds fall apart, you can always fix it with some glue. Once the deer is glued down, I am going to use some more of that beautiful crystal paste. I'm definitely obsessed with this product. I'm a bit sad that I got it towards the end of the Christmas crafting season, but that's okay. I can definitely get a lot of ideas together for next year. As a last minute little touch, I did decide to glue this little bird onto the 3-tree design. Before my crust medium was completely dry, I took some of Paint Couture's Sheer Frost German glitter, and I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of that beautiful glitter onto my wet crust medium. This will be a very subtle shine here, but I think it goes perfectly with that snow and the crystal paste. I did decide I wanted to lighten this a little bit, so I'm taking some of Paint Couture's Farmhouse linen chalk paint and I'm just doing some dry brushing over the top of the details. I did end up doing 2 layers of dry brushing. I want this to have a very wintry, festive feel. I didn't want it to be too dark and gothic, so this just lightens it up just a little bit. You can see here on the second coat of dry brushing how it really brings out all of those beautiful details, and I love the contrast with that lovely aged cafe pigment that we added. It all just works so beautifully together. When that's dry, I'm going to use Stardust Heavy Metal Metallics by Paint Couture. This is so highly pigmented and beautiful. I'm definitely obsessed with this. I'm going around and I'm hitting the high points and the details of our design here, and it's just got the most beautiful shimmer. We don't have these yet in Australia. Fingers crossed we can get them next year. It is similar to the Silver Luxe Metallics, but this is just a little bit more vibrant and intense. So you can see I'm just going around and adding that beautiful metallic to all of those details. You can see I'm alternating between using a brush and also my finger. So depending on how intense I want it to be, I will use a brush for more intensity, but I will use my finger for it to be a little bit more subtle. So I did just want to mention that my project today was inspired by a few photos that I'd seen on Pinterest. Let me know where you get your inspiration from. If you're looking for inspiration and collaboration, I would love it if you would join my Facebook Creatives group. I will put the links for that in the comments. Come interact, share your projects. I hope to see you there. When the Stardust Metallic was dry, I took my Bronze Luxe Metallic and I'm just going in with a paintbrush and I'm hitting a few of the details. I don't want to go in the same spots exactly that I went with the Stardust Metallic. I just wanted that contrast. I didn't want this to just be the one tone. I wanted a few things to pop out, just a little bit of color variance there. So I'm just going around and hitting a few of the edges. There's some little flowers in the molds that are around the edges of the frames there. And I'm just picking out little details. So if you're going to try this, it will be to your liking which areas you choose to highlight with your contrasting color. Something to keep in mind with the metallics is that they're not going to appear to their full advantage until they are completely dry. So as you're applying it, you might feel like it's not as shiny as you'd like. Trust me, once they are dry, they are so beautiful and vibrant. Definitely one of my all-time favorite products to use. I definitely think that these would look gorgeous sitting on a shelf, but I definitely want them to be an ornament option as well. So I'm going to take some red velvet ribbon here, and I am just going to create a little loop, and that is what we're going to be attaching to the back of our frame for hanging. These are quite light decorations, so this is definitely going to be enough to hold them in place. So I'm going to cut out 4 lengths of this beautiful ribbon. I'm then going to use hot glue to glue the ribbon down, and of course glue the ribbon to itself so that it stays in one place. And here are our finished ornaments. I love how these turned out. I'm also really grateful that I was able to try some of these beautiful products from Paint Couture before the end of the Christmas season. Let me know if you had a favorite ornament from this collection. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. For my second project today, I'm going to be pouring some resin in IOD's Holly Lane mold. This was from their Christmas release last year, and I've already cast another one of these pine cones, and I'm just going to put some string in my wet resin. We're going to be using that because we're creating an ornament. I'm then going to take another one of those pine cones that I've pre-casted, and I'm positioning it over the top of my wet resin. And you can see here, once it's all dry, it's all combined and sort of fused together, and we have a double-sided ornament. I do have some excess resin there, but I'm just going to pull it off with my finger, and then I'm also going to use a little craft knife to further remove any of that excess resin. This is a pretty easy thing to do. Once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'm going to take some tape and I am going to add it to the little string that we put in the resin while it was still wet. I don't want to get paint on that. I want that to be nice and clean so it looks tidy when it's hanging from the tree. So I'm just protecting that with the tape. I'm then going to be using Dixie Belle's Vintage Duck Egg, and I'm going to be applying that to both sides of our ornament here. And as you can see, this pine cone casting is so beautiful and so detailed. It's only going to take one coat here as my paint is so highly pigmented. I just wanted to take a quick moment to tell you guys that I have a free Facebook group. If you didn't already know, I'll have a link for that in the comments. Come and join us, share your projects, interact with other creatives, and I'm there to help you out with any craft questions you might have. Once my paint is dry, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin to seal my paint in. Once that clear coat is dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Antique Gold paint and I'm going to be running it over the top of the details of our pine cone. I'm also working it into some of the lower parts of the pine cone design there in certain areas. I really want this to look like perhaps gold gilding that has worn away over time. I still want to be able to see that lovely vintage duck egg that we painted, but I still do want that hint of gold, that lovely metallic shine that we associate with Christmas decorations. So I'm being pretty random about this. If you're going to do it, it'll be up to you how much gold and how much of that blue that you see. And I'm also doing the same effect on the other side of the pine cone. Once that gold is dry, I'm going to take this little bow. It's from IOD's Jingle mold from their release last year, and I'm also going to be using that lovely antique gold paint on this bow. I'm just going to do one coat here. I'm definitely going for a bit more of a French country feel here with the gold and the sort of French style blue. If you wanted to be a bit more traditional, you could go with a red bow at this point, or maybe use a ribbon instead of using a bow mold instead. Once my gold paint is dry, I am going to remove that tape that we put on to protect the hanging string, and then I'm going to use my hot glue again to attach my bow to my pine cone. I'm cleaning up any excess glue with a wet wipe. And here's our finished pine cone ornament. I think this turned out really sweet. I love that some of the IOD molds are symmetrical so you can get these double-sided designs. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my final project today, I'm going to be pouring some resin into this lovely leaping reindeer. This is the Jingle mold by IOD. I've already cast the other reindeer that you see in the top left there. You can see me putting that there over the top of the wet resin. We're doing another double-sided ornament, so I'm just putting that casting on top of the wet resin, and it will fuse those two together. And then once it's completely dry, I'm going to carefully take it out of the mold. And you will see there are a few little gaps here and there. If that really bothered you, you could use some hot glue to fill it in. Honestly, I don't mind. I'm then going to take my little craft knife and I'm going to remove any excess resin. Now, I probably should have put a little bit of string in that resin while it was still wet, but I wanted something a little bit more classy for this one. So at this point, I'm going to use my craft knife and I am going to make a little hole in the center of the deer so that I can add a hanging attachment. And I'm going to be using this little jewelry clasp piece here. I'm just going to flatten the sides of that, and then I am going to just make sure that that hole is big enough, and then I'm going to add some hot glue so that I can add that little clasp into that hole so that I have something to hang that reindeer from the tree on. So I'm just going to fit that in there and then let that dry. I want to add a little bit of greenery around my reindeer's neck, so I'm going to cast some of this greenery, this foliage from this mold here. I will link it below, so I'm just casting that in resin, and then I'm going to pull it out of my mold. I'm just going to pull off any of that excess resin and tidy it up, and I'm just going to double check here that it is going to fit and look the way that I want around the reindeer. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to set it to one side, and I'm going to use Dixie Belle's chocolate chalk mineral paint, and I'm going to give this double-sided deer one coat. I did start off painting it with the bronze luxe metallic, which is what we're going to come in with next, but it would have taken too many coats to get the coverage that I want over the top of this dark white resin. So I thought I'd put down that chocolate first, and it would be a great base. It would take less coats of that bronze to get the color that I want. So I'm just going to go in and paint the entire reindeer with that chocolate chalk mineral paint, and I'm being careful not to get any of it on our little hanging attachment. I don't want that to get blocked because we need to be able to put a little ring through that a bit later. Once that's completely dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Luxe Bronze Metallic and I'm going to go over the top of our reindeer. It did take 1.5 coats. My second coat was only a touch-up coat. As you can see, this is a very highly pigmented product. I went with bronze paint for this, but you could definitely use a gold, you could use a silver, whatever your color scheme for your tree, you could definitely use that color on this lovely reindeer. While that's drying, I'm going to take Dixie Belle's Palmetto chalk mineral paint. This is a lovely deep green, and I'm going to paint that greenery that we cast earlier. It's just going to take one coat to get the coverage that I want here. Once that's dry, I'm going to use my hair dryer and I'm going to heat up that little piece so that it makes bending it around my reindeer a bit easier. I'm then going to manipulate it so that it will fit the reindeer the way that I want, and then I'm going to use some hot glue to attach it. I'm being careful not to use too much here because obviously I don't want it coming out the sides and ruining our lovely bronze paint. Once I had that greenery on, I did notice that some of the resin had become visible, so I just went back in and touched up with some green paint anywhere that I could see that white resin. Once that was dry, I took some more of that bronze luxe metallic and I'm just going to dab on a few little spots on the garland to mimic ornaments or lights. And I'm going to be doing the same thing on the other side as well. And then I just took a little bit more of that paint and I just ran it over the details of that greenery casting, and it really brought out all of the leaf details, and it just really tied in beautifully, I think, with the bronze on our reindeer. I then took a little metal ring that we're going to open up with my pliers. We're going to thread it through our little hanging clasp that we added earlier. I'm going to close up that loop with my pliers. I then had to decide what I was going to use to hang the reindeer, and I decided on this red velvet ribbon. I just cut off a length that I was going to need. I threaded it through the little ring that we attached, and then I'm just going to tie a simple knot up the top. I went with red here, but obviously you could pick gold, silver, whatever would go with your tree. And here's our finished reindeer ornament. I love how this double-sided reindeer ornament turned out. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. To begin, I'm going to prime 2 of these plastic bells with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. I'm going to be applying the primer with a sponge. This is obviously going to minimize any look of brush strokes. It'll give it a much smoother look. I picked up these bells from a dollar store here in Australia, and I knew they would be a great blank canvas. After painting the inside and outside of these bells with 2 coats, I'm now using this mold that I picked up online. I'll be sure to link it in the comments. I'm going to dust it first with some cornstarch, and then I'm going to use my dust air dry clay. I'm rolling it into a sort of sausage shape there, and then I'm starting to work it into the mold. I'm using my thumbs to push out the excess clay, then flexing the mold and gently pulling it out. There's also a sweet little bow design down the bottom there, so I'm going to work my clay into that, and I'm going to cast 3 of those and 3 of the greenery that we just did. I'm then going to start gluing down my mold, so I'm going to put 3 of the greenery design around the base of the bell, and I'm making sure that each one of these is sort of connecting up. And then once I have all of those pieces glued down, I'm then going to add glue to the back of each of the little bows. I'm gluing the bows down at the transition where each of the greenery molds meet. I'll be repeating the same process on the other bell that I prepared and leaving it for 24 hours to dry. Next, I'm going to be painting each of these bells with Dixie Belle's buttercream. I'm brushing the paint on and really working it into the molds down below as well. I'm still being pretty gentle though. I don't want to disturb any of those even though they are completely dry. And then once I'm happy with the coverage of that buttercream paint, I did end up deciding to start dabbing and stippling that paint on to minimize the brush stroke. This will also create even texture and hide any imperfections in those plastic bells. I will then, of course, paint the inside of both of the bells. It ended up taking 2 coats of this paint on each of the bells to get the coverage I wanted. Next, I'm going to seal both of my bells with Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in satin. When that was dry, I took Paint Couture's Evergreen Chalk Paint, and I'm using a small artist brush to go in and add that green to the greenery design down the bottom. Now, there's not just greenery, there's also ornaments, there's also a ribbon that's weaving through that design. So I'm just painting the areas where the leaves are. So I'm going to work my way around and paint both of these bells at the same time, because even though we're doing two different designs, both of these bells do need that greenery focused on. I'm then going to take my buttercream brush that I used before. I've got rid of the excess, and now I'm doing some dry brushing over the top of one of the bells. This is going to be our more winter sort of feeling bell here. So it's going to have light colors and a real sort of frosted look to it. When that layer was dry, I took Paint Couture's Peace Mineral Paint, and I'm going in with a small artist brush and I'm painting the sweet bows that we added, and then I'm also going to be adding the same lovely grey tone to the ribbon that weaves in and out of that greenery design. So I'm going to work my way around the bell until I have all of the ribbon and bows painted in that lovely grey. When that was dry, I took Paint Couture's French Gold. This is a heavy metal metallic, and I am going in with an artist brush and I'm going over the top of the little ornaments that are in this particular mold design. And I'm going to go around until I have all of those ornaments painted in that beautiful French gold. When the gold was dry, I took Paint Couture's Stardust Heavy Metal Metallic, and I'm going in and adding that beautiful metallic to the edges of the bow, to the edges of the ribbon that weave in and out of the garland. I'm just hitting those points to add a little bit of shine, but I don't want it to be too overwhelming. Again, these paints are just gorgeous. They're so highly pigmented. Definitely one of my favorite things to use. If I've inspired you to try these Paint Couture products, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will pop it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. And right now they have a 20% off sale. Use my code Farmhouse20 to get your discount. Next, I'm going to use Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1. I'm applying it to the bell in a sort of cross-hatching motion. I'm then going to let this dry completely, which took about an hour. It will feel sticky to the touch when it's ready for Step 2, which I'm coming in with now. And I'm just repeating the same process as before, putting it down in a cross-hatching motion to create irregular cracks, and then I let this dry overnight. While the crackle was drying, I took Paint Couture's Oyster Pearl Luxe Metallic Paint, and I just lightly went over some of the areas where we did our dry brushing. I really want this to look a bit like frost or snow, and this Oyster Pearl really creates a beautiful effect. When that was dry, I took my Stardust Heavy Metal Metallic Paint again, and now I'm going over the top of my dry crackle. I'm really working it into all of the beautiful cracks that we created, and then once I'm happy with how they're looking, I'm going to take a wet wipe and I'm going to wipe back the excess. This is going to be a very subtle look, but I didn't want to go super antique with this and add anything dark. I still wanted this to be quite a frosted winter wonderland look. So the Stardust Metallic is looking beautiful in those cracks, and I think it's really achieving an aged look, but still quite subtle. Once that was dry, I took the same metallic and I'm just going to go around the base of the bell and add some of that metallic there. It'll just be a hint of silver peeking out underneath. I also added the same silver to the top section of our bell. When that was dry, I took out my Extreme Guard in satin again, and I'm going to use it a little bit like a glue. I'm going to add it around the base of the bell, and I'm also going to add it lightly around the middle section of the bell and a little bit heavier on the top section of the bell. I want to add some German glass glitter, so it needs something to stick to. So while that's still wet, I'm going to take my pure silver German glass glitter by Paint Couture. I haven't used this one yet, so I was excited to try it, and I'm going to take the end of a spoon and use that as a scoop to scoop out that glitter and sprinkle it on top of my wet top coat. And you can see that it's sticking nicely. I'm just using my finger to spread that out just a little bit more, and then I'm going to sprinkle it over the center part of the bell and of course the sections around the bottom where we added the top coat. After shaking off the excess glitter, I put it to one side and took out my amazing casting resin. I'm going to pour out part A and part B in equal measure and then stir it together well for about 30 seconds. And I'm going to be adding it to IOD's Cameo Mould. I'm specifically focusing on the smaller designs there. I want to create something that looks a little bit like a gem to go in the center of a ribbon that I want to add to the top of the bell. After about 10 minutes, my resin is ready and set, so I'm going to take out the pieces that I've cast. I'm only going to need two, one for this bell, one for the other. I'm then going to take the oyster pearl out again, Paint Couture's Luxe Metallic, and you can see I've taken this design from IOD's Cameo Mould and I'm painting the center to make it look like a pearl. And when that's dry, I'm taking that Stardust Metallic back out again and I'm adding it around the border. And it is amazing how this looks like little crystals. It just catches the light so beautifully. So I'm going to go around the edge of this casting until I've painted the entire border in that beautiful Stardust Metallic. When that was dry, I took out some lace ribbon that I thrifted. I'm going to take out enough to make 2 loops for a bow. You can see I'm winding it around my hand. I'm pinching it in the center. I'm then taking some twine and tying a knot in the center to hold my pieces together. Once I've tied that knot and I have it secure, I'm going to cut off some more of that ribbon so that I can make the little tails for the bow. I'm then tying that to the bow with the excess twine that's on the back there, and then I am going to cut off the excess twine. And once I've done that, I'm just going to have a play and pull the sections of the bow out. I've added a little bit of glue to the center, and now we can add our little resin gem that we painted. I'm adding a bit of glue to the back of that and attaching it to our bell. I then took my scissors to cut the ends of the bow there to give it a little bit of a neater finish. And then once I've done that, I took some cord that I had from another project and I'm just attaching it to my bell with some twine. It was too thick to go through the hole that was on that bell already. So you can see I'm just tying a knot in that cord and then I'm going to attach it to the bell with the twine. I'm going to tie a double knot and then trim off the excess. And here's our winter style bell. I really hope that you enjoyed this video collection, and you can find the products used in this video on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share this out to a friend that you think might enjoy it.